Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 in the relaunch of RMCC's podcast, Elevated Businesses, where I have conversations with cannabis entrepreneurs. Today, I am thrilled to discuss policy, building a cannabis business, and the legacy market with Matt, the owner of Garden of Gele. Matt, you're a no bullshit advocate for policy reform and seeking the battle lines to move our industry forward. Before we dive into the Maine market and all the hard work that you have been doing, can you first introduce yourself and tell us how you got started in cannabis?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Matt Bayliss, born and raised Worcester, Massachusetts. Spent a lot of years on the road traveling the States in the 90s. I've been involved with cannabis for 30 years now, smoking, pretty much started selling it in high school, never really stopped. Cleaned my act up in '05, ended up in Cali in '08, and that's when I started cultivating. I own an adult use cultivation license up here in Maine, small. We're 800 square feet of canopy, and we've been in the market for a year and a half since our market opened. We were there day one.
Love it. And you've been doing this for what, 30 years now?
Yeah. 92 is the first time I smoked, and pretty much started selling it, like I said, in high school. Never really stopped. It's been a big part of my life. I mean, I use it medically. I've had migraines since I was in middle school. It helped me with that. And really became an advocate from the beginning as well. I mean, my parents were 18 when I was born, so I was around it when I was young and softened to the idea of the counterculture and, all these bullshit battles that went on in the United States from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So.
Right. Yeah. And you got started in Northern California under your first tent out there?
Cultivation, Northern California. Ended up there in '08. Trimmed up on the hill a bit. Knew a bunch of people in the Bay Area that were doing indoor cultivation in the outer Sunset and stuff. So did a lot of house sitting, trim gigs, stuff like that. Saved up enough money. Got a small house up in Sonoma and popped my first tent 13 years ago. So I've been cultivating 13 years now. Moved back to Maine, moved back East Coast, moved to Maine 10 years ago.
Awesome. And during our previous conversations, you said that you saw the writing on the wall in California, and that's a big reason why you migrated on over to Maine. Can you elaborate a little bit more when you say you saw the writing on the wall in California?
For sure. I mean, '08, it was like being, you're in a time machine in Sonoma County. I mean, it was just the hub of cultivation and the cannabis culture and industry back at that time frame. I mean, Hydro Farms was like stationed in Sonoma, and it was just, that's what everyone was doing. I mean, there were houses everywhere, and prices were still really good in California at that point. So it was full on green rush. And just walking into like big box stores during harvest season, right when I got there, and seeing like, turkey bags and Fisker scissors like on pallets stacked to the ceiling, publicly traded company, they're in on the gig, and it just kind of triggered something in my mind. And I just saw it. I was like, there's no pulling the genie back in the bottle. This is going to happen here. It's going to happen everywhere.
Absolutely. And so what were your first steps when you moved back out to Maine?
First step was to become a registered caregiver. Definitely was a bad boy in the '90s and in the knots, and had my brushes with the law, and there was a time and a place for that. But when I got into cultivation, I was older. I was in my 30s, and I really have always wanted to serve the plant since I got into it, and wanted to take myself seriously, and wanted to take what the plant offers more seriously. So I always looked at kind of coloring inside the lines. Even when I was in Cali, I only sold to dispensaries. So when I came back to Maine, I immediately became a caregiver and started working in that system, which at that time we only were allowed to have 5 or 6 patients, depending on how you interpreted the law at that time. And then over the course of time, through advocacy and grassroots, there's a lot of grassroots people up here. The program expanded, and we started opening caregiver storefronts. That was just after I'd moved into a warehouse and kind of expanded. And that's where things started to blossom up. So
awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. And for some of our listeners that may not exactly understand the differences between like a caregiver market and a licensed market, do you mind unpacking like what the differences are and maybe what like those gray areas might be between a caregiver and a like a licensed cultivation?
Sure. I mean, there was a lot, 10 years ago when I got here, it was a lot of one on one relationships. And, you don't question anyone for what they got the card for. You just serve them. And it was a lot of word of mouth. So it was a lot of more interpersonal relationships and also networking with other caregivers. Like who's doing the topicals, who's doing the suppositories, who's doing this, who's got, I was always focused on the flower. So that was so we started to work together on who needed what and how to fill that in. And, a couple times a year, you'd get a call from a friend of a friend or a family member that was stage 4 and very serious. And, RSO was all the rage back then. So, there's a lot of hardcore work in there. And that's kind of what galvanized, how seriously I wanted to take it and really like how important, clean and competent cultivation is in the whole thing. So, that's a smaller model. And then basically, into more regulated, licensed caregiver wholesaling to stores, you got more oversight from our regulatory body, Office of Marijuana Policy, about packaging and sales tax requirements and all this kind of stuff. So it was a good on-ramp to now I'm in adult use, which is bum, bum, bum. We got Metrc, we got cameras, we got all this kind of wazoo. Operating costs just go through the roof. And yeah, but it's a whole nother game, and that's something to be appreciated there. It's like, this is the big leagues, and I appreciate that, and I like being here. There's no back door. Everything's going out the front door, everything's getting tested, and everything's going to market. And that's the game I'm in, and I'm loving it right now. So
That's awesome. And you previously spoke about building and scaling a business, but also making sure that you keep your quality while you're scaling your business. Can you talk a little bit more about what those business strategies that you implemented to make sure that you can keep the quality of your cannabis?
yeah, just staying small. I mean, I got some advice 3 or 4 years ago from a legislator up in Maine when I was doing some advocacy on some legislation back then, and he said, "Listen, he knew the big dogs were coming. They were seeing a lot of lobbyists from the big guys, and he's just like, if you're serious and you're going to do this, you need to stay nimble and small." So, you know, just keeping it tight. I think a lot of people watching this are going to scoff and be like 800 square feet of canopy. And it's like, yeah, that's what we're doing. I got 14 employees. We got 800 square feet of canopy and the quality's banging. All our cannabinoids are in the 30s. It's unfuckable quality. And, that's what we want. I tell everyone on my team, it's like at the end of the day, someone just worked 40, 60 hour a week and they're dropping coin on our product. When they crack that jar, everything in there needs to stoke them out. So, I've been involved in the beer industry in that little gap of time where I was like a good boy, '05 to '08, and always loved good beer and watched how like good beer companies would scale up, and it wasn't the same. What happened? Well, they
Yep.
went from 5 barrel systems to 30 barrel systems to a factory. They changed water systems. They did all this kind of stuff. Not the same thing. So, everything matters. Everything counts in cultivation. So, we are going to scale up. I mean, I can double my capacity in the footprint I'm in right now. It's more about building a team. I mean, I'd be horrified to have to hire 30 people off the bat. I mean, that just sounds like a nightmare. So for me, I have no partners. I have all my equity. I've built this all from debt. A lot of long nights, a lot of tears, a lot of sweat. A lot of blood, but I'm here and we're ready to make those next steps. But for me, I just never really want to work with a lot of partners, a lot of equity people looking over your shoulder, and we got to take it one step at a time. So
I feel that. I've learned the hard way there too. So I
yeah,
definitely understand business and partnerships and how challenging that can all be. And especially now in a very highly regulated industry, like all that red tape is just an entire other level to all of it. And
yeah,
with that being said, you are heavily involved in policy work. And I think this is really where you and I cross paths talking about compliance and
sure,
policy and just all of the straight up badass things Maine is doing. And I think Maine is very unique to other states. And I would love to unpack that a little bit further. But for people that may not know what's happening in Maine and all of the great work you all have been doing on pushing back on Metrc and over too much red tape and regulations and things like that. Do you mind giving us a little bit of a summary on what's happening in Maine, what previously happened, where you are now, and what's going to happen potentially in the future?
Sure, yeah, I'll try to keep it concise. But where we are
You
right
got
now,
it.
we're in the middle. We're in the middle of a legislative session right now. It's the first like kind of in-person stuff back since COVID. It's an emergency session, but my trade organization was able to get 3 bills going, so we got that stuff going. We're more focused on adult use, but we all came from med. There's a lot of med stuff going on right now, so they kind of bifurcate, with the med stuff and the AU stuff right now. So there's a lot of action, a lot of good stuff, for grassroots operators happening here in Maine, both in med and adult use. Just pushing back on overregulation, really. And I mentioned to you in our previous conversation just how unique Maine is and how approachable our state legislation is. And they're your neighbors. They only get like a $3,000 stipend a year. They want to hear from their constituents, and they want to hear from people who are real stakeholders. And Maine, unlike a lot of other legislatures in Washington, they're sick of lobbyists, and they can smell them from a mile away. So when you come with facts and you're polite and you can present them well and you have that operational knowledge, they really appreciate that. And it's taken a while. I mean, I testified my first time 10 years ago, right when I got back up here, just to see how that advocacy grassroots network has grown over the last 10 years is amazing. And I think we're really going to be leaders for establishing a sustainable model for smaller operators that hopefully the country can learn from, because obviously they're going to take all the bad tricks that they've learned in all the over-regulated states and take them down to Washington. We're going to try to stand up a program that can stand toe-to-toe with that, show it to be more equitable, more fair, more transparent, higher quality, and better for all the employees and everyone involved in the program. So that's where we're at. We got a lot of traction. We've had a lot of victories, both in Med and AU the last couple of years, and we're going to keep on keeping on.
I love it. What were some of those victories?
Just always pushing back, really. I mean, when opening up the Caregiver storefront model was a big thing 3 or 4 years ago. My trade organization, we were only allowed to wholesale so much out at that point. I think they only want us to wholesale 25%, and then we had to do direct with patients. My trade organization about 3 years ago was able to move that up to 75-25 in favor of wholesale. So that just catapulted a bunch of brands and the Caregiver storefront. The people that went vertical with like med grows into med stores, I mean, they blossomed. I mean, a lot of those places gross in excess of 2-3 mil a year. So that really catapulted and got the industry kickstarted. It isn't just about those operators making money and all this stuff. It was about, okay, now we're hiring people. Now we're paying taxes up the wazoo. Now like every tradesman in the state knows what we're up to and know that we're a major economic driver. And at this point, Maine's med market is over $250 million a year.
Wow.
Yeah, which is bigger than blueberries the lobster in this state, which is huge.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. Is it one of the number one cash crops in
it certainly is.
The state of Maine?
Yep. And our Democratic governor won't acknowledge the existence of either of our programs. Even in her State of the State address and touting her $800 million surplus, if you did the math on that, a real good chunk of that came from cannabis. And she used to be state prosecutor, attorney general. She's the prohibition.
Funny how that plays out.
Yeah, that's how that goes. But yeah, we're a force to be reckoned with, and the people we employ, and we educate the legislators. They know that smaller local businesses are going to keep that money local, whereas the Curaleafs and the acreage come in this state. And they're just hiring at the low, just minimum wage, turning people over, sucking all those profits out of state. So we make a lot of things happen in the state with cannabis, and it's been from grassroots advocacy.
Yeah. And I just hear what I keep on hearing is it comes back down to relationships,
Yep.
like the caregiver model and just how important relationships were with your patients there during the caregiver days. And then everything doing the policy work and the people that are, pushing all the buttons on the back end, only working half part time
Yeah.
and only taking a $3,000 stipend and things like that. Like it seems like Maine's very different compared to other states. And because you guys are the number one cash crop, whether they want to say so or
Yeah.
not, like that has a lot of influence. And with some of that influence, one of the big initiatives that, of course, came across my radar was the medical market pushing back against Metrc and against state traceability, and just how much red tape comes with that, how it takes you 3 to 5 times in length to complete one workflow because of the system and everything else. I mean, you're experiencing it under the adult use side, and as you being one of the first adult use cultivation licenses, like you were trial and error and like
Sure.
just trying to figure it out. And so taking that and then saying, no, the medical side doesn't need this, and we can still have safe products enter the market, and more importantly, quality products entering the market as well. Just because you have this seed to sale system doesn't mean that that is synonymous with quality.
Nope. And it doesn't. And I got the regulators to admit under testimony that it doesn't prevent diversion. So what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
What's the point? Except that
Yeah.
they can pat themselves on the back, and it all comes back to the stigma. That's the thing that really gets in my craw, is we're still treated like goddamn criminals. And it's and Metrc
Right.
is like salt and lemon in that wound every single day. I mean, it is a terrible system. I'm sorry, it's a terrible company. I mean, we have to get after them just to get our receipt of invoice every month so we can put it on our books. It takes like 2 or 3 emails.
Yeah.
So they're completely incompetent. They're just going to get worse. And I am going to fight like hell. So when I'm watching the Super Bowl on 2026, they don't have a halftime commercial or the halftime show brought to you by Metrc, Cardi B, brought to you by Metrc, the gold standard in track and trace. That's what's going to happen if we don't do something. It's there. I mean,
Yeah.
think about what their market cap would be if they got that, and that's where they want to
Yeah.
head, and it's not happening. I mean, they're inept. They're
Yeah.
inept, and it's sad. There needs to be a system. We need to have transparency. We need to track inventory. I get that. I'm not trying to do this smokescreen cover so operators can do whatever the hell they want. It is tedious and tenacious and torturous how Metrc works. So it's completely unfair. We're pushing back on that hard, and we're getting results. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, as I will sing this till I'm blue in the face, it's like I just feel like with Metrc, they're more worried about market share and not actually improving their
oh
product.
yeah,
And second of all, I think that the tool could be significantly more powerful if there was some sort of like QR code or something on the final form product so the consumer could actually see from seed to sale where their product came from, and like if it was tested or remediated, or did they like mess with the test results. Like California, for an example, if your certified of analysis test results expire after 12 months, you can get it retested and keep it on the
yeah,
shelf. So it's like, hey, I would like to see that in my product. Like I would like to know how long this has been sitting here, where it came from. Did it truly come from Southern Humboldt or did it not? And you're just using that branding. And I mean, that's against the regulations too. But anyways, but just there's pros and cons to it, but there's just so much more cons. And I just feel like watching Maine take that initiative forward and just fight back against it just lit a fire under so many people. I mean, Oklahoma tried to do something similar, like with the whole Metrc implementation, but like that was a completely different scenario than
yeah,
Maine. Because Maine, you guys are actually pushing this through the legislator. Like you guys are actually like working with people on the ground. In Oklahoma, it was very different because they just didn't have the regulatory
I get
framework
that.
for it. So they didn't have any structure around it. But yeah, back to Maine. So I am just so excited to see how this is all evolving over the past few years. I mean, For me, it's been a bit challenging as a compliance officer trying to stay on top of Maine. I've kind of just given up on the medical side because I've just seen it's just been like a
Yeah.
standstill trying to work through all of these things. But you being so boots on the ground and just fighting every single battle line to make sure that we can move our industry forward, what is some of those best practices or techniques that have really worked for you to really make improvements in your policy work?
That's a good question. It's a lot of work. I mean, everyone's flat out. If you're in this industry, you're flat out. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask more from you, which is like, you got to do policy work. You got to. If you want this industry to survive, if you want to be doing what you're doing in 5 years, you absolutely have to get involved. And so at a base level, you should be following legislation. You should get to know your legislative calendar, how that works, what committee oversees the bills, and start to track stuff. Get involved with a trade organization, or at least follow the trade organizations and see what they're doing. Maybe they're not worth dealing with. A lot of them aren't great and nefarious, but just start tracking. You got to get involved, and you got to follow the legislation. And I'm lucky to be in a good trade organization. I've been in there for 3-4 years now. So yeah, I mean, we have good lobbyists that have a lot of pull up there, and we put bills together. So I mean, that's a whole process. So our Metrc bill is LD 1817, and basically what we're doing there is we're getting away from individual plant tagging to canopy. And it's not out of committee yet. It's probably, we're not going to be able to do it for packaging. It looks like we're just going to be able to do it for cultivation. So, but yeah, that's kind of how stuff works, is just get involved, start following stuff and sniffing stuff out. And if you find a group of people that are doing good work, by all means, if you can afford a dab rig and you can afford pretty things that you flash on Instagram, you better be throwing people some money. You better be, because if not, you're really just wasting everybody's time and taking up space. So if you got some extra cash and you find, first you got to track it, you got to follow, figure out what's going on, educate yourself. If there's a group out there to support and you don't got the time, at least throw them money. If you got the time, get involved, join, start getting involved, start going to meetings, start talking. And I've moved my way up to our legislative committee, and at this point, at that point, we're bringing in a bunch of legislators in the off season to educate them. We bring in the legislators that are on our oversight committee and educating them one-on-one in our own facilities, and creating relationships with them and showing them firsthand what goes on. And then we have to find a legislator to sponsor the bill. So shout out Laura Sapika, Representative Sapika from Bangor. She's our sponsor on LD 1817, and looking forward to a nice victory for her in the coming month, getting that passed. But yeah, it takes, and then it takes testifying, which in the COVID age just got a hell of a lot easier because everything went to Zoom, and who knows, it's going to be state by state by state. Hopefully they let the Zoom exist with the in-person again. But, it's, you get in there and you testify and you hang in with it. And sometimes they ask you back for work sessions, and sometimes you're getting emails and calls while they're in session from individual people to get, and yeah. If you're a subject matter expert, and you got the time, get in there, because they want to hear your voices. Now, I don't know how that's going to work in Mass. I don't know how that's going to work in Cali, Oregon, everything else. But by all means, get off your ass and give it a shot. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to the plant. You owe it to the industry to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we need to hear these voices. I mean, regulators are writing out these regulations and maybe have never stepped foot into a grow or a dispensary and don't know the logistics and just how tough it all is. That I like to say they make perfect world regulations, and there is nothing perfect world about our businesses and
They are
operating.
not plant touchers. They are not small business owners. They are mostly bureaucrats and lawyers. And they like to sit around and do a lot of self-congratulatory bullshit. But within those organizations, there's good people. And, that's another thing. That's like, let's not just throw them under the bus. Try to engage with them. If they do, if they do engage with the public, try to engage with them on a one-on-one basis and suss them out as a human being first, and not just like, hey, you're a regulator, you're the enemy. You got to take it down to a human level. But obviously, if they're up to nefarious, no good stuff, and they're only dealing with the big guys and don't want to talk to smaller people, then by all means, take it to the legislature and make their life hell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. All about
Yeah.
relationships. So if you can snag it, go
For
after
sure.
it. And you mentioned that you are part of an advocacy group. What advocacy group and are you a part of, and how did they form?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. That's a Maine Cannabis Industry Association. So they've been around for a minute. It was basically like three caregivers hiring the same lobbyist, and then the lobbyist was like, "Why don't you guys form a trade organization?" And then they opened that up for membership 4 years ago. So yeah, and that's been the deal. And honestly, our trade organization and the regulatory body had a great working relationship up until last summer, last fall. Things changed a bit. We're working through that right now, but that it's we had to make moves, so it is what it is. But that was before we even had conditional licensing and stuff. So it was great that Director Gunderson took the time, and he was very gracious, and we did spend a lot of time talking about stuff. It can't be all about the small guys, unfortunately. So and there's other agendas at play, and that's just the way it is. So. But yeah, Maine Cannabis Industry Association has been around 4 years. We have an in-person meeting tomorrow night. We're looking forward to that. We don't get to do that very often these days, so that'll be great. We'll be doing a legislative recap, and we're looking towards next year already. What we're finding out is that we're going to have to do a lot of language overhauls. So we want to do some statutory moves next year, and really kind of almost do the whole law over again. The original law was really drafted with a lot of compromises. To get in a little bit of the granularity of it, we had a governor at the time that was a mini Trump. He was very obtuse. So we had to get this bill across that was going to have a veto override proof. It was going to be veto proof. To get that, we had to get the Christian Coalition on board. And a lot of compromises were made, and unfortunately, those are in statute. So everyone is agreeing at this point. Stakeholders, legislature, and even the regulatory body is like, yeah, we need to go back and do that, because we're just going to be butting heads year in, year out. So yeah, we're very, very much focused in the now right now with our 3 bills, and looking forward to the future. So and building our membership.
Awesome.
So it's a great organization.
Awesome. And what were those other 2 bills? You mentioned the Metrc bill. Are the other ones just...
So one's a test. Well, they're both kind of testing bills, and one's a variance bill that basically changes the variance for pass fail. Well, it's not a pass fail. It changes the variance on potency. So right now we have a 10 milligram cap on edibles. And the variance only allows it to go to 10.1. So if it tests over 10.1, you got to throw the whole batch out, right? So we want that variance to go up to 11, so people can because nobody's making stuff near 10. Everyone's capping it at 9 because they're afraid to go over. Yeah. So, and then on the small side, it gives you a greater variance for low dose stuff. So there's a variance bill, and then there's also a testing bill that we only have to test the end product. Right now I have to test flour and trim. That trim's going off to the processor. It's going to be made in the batter, and then that batter has to get tested again. So if we choose, we only have to test once as a product goes out to market. So those are the 2 other bills. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really nice. And so, just to make sure I'm understanding, so if you did, let's say, test the bulk flour, and then you made pre-packed eighths out of it, you wouldn't have to retest the eighths because you've already tested the bulk.
We can
flour?
do that right now. It's more about processing. So it's more about it's more about if you're for me, my trim and my smalls go to be made to batter. I don't have to test it before it goes out. It can just be tested once it's ready to leave the lab. Yep.
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, that really helps.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Money. And because you're boots on the ground and you all know and you've been through it, so you're like, hey, this doesn't make sense. So let's change this, please.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that going on.
Love it. Awesome. And then one of my last questions for you. So, if you had a genie in the bottle and were given three wishes for the cannabis industry, what would they be?
Whew. Um, Number one, I hope the feds don't fuck this up. That's the biggest wish. Boy, they can really fuck this thing up big time. So people really need to be
Hmm.
focused on that. Number one. Uh, Number two, I pray for the smaller operators, in every state, and that model remains viable. Um, and number three, I worry about the plant, and so I hope the culture and the plant doesn't get lost as this industry blossoms into the tens and tens of billions of dollars. So my three wishes are: feds don't fuck this up. What was number two? Uh,
Number two is the sustaining
Yeah,
the
smaller
smaller
operators, and
operators.
number three is let's keep the plant in this, please, and the culture.
Keep the plant and the culture. I love it. And let's unpack each one of those a little bit further. So, what are all the ways the Fed could fuck this up?
Whew. I mean, well, right out the gate, they were talking about a 25% sales tax. I
Yeah.
mean, forget about it. I mean, yeah. I mean,
Right?
it'd be over. It'd be over. And so in
Yeah.
those instances, I love to play the illicit market whack a mole game with those guys. It's like, you want $80 ace? Washington Square Park's going to have $20 ace, and there's not one cop that's going to do
Yep.
anything about it. So, and I think that's got traction. That $25 sales tax will never happen, but they could, OSHA getting involved. I mean, starting to pick apart all your
Yeah.
practices and all that kind of stuff. There's just a million overregulation. I mean, that's their kind of that's what they do. They overregulate, they overtax,
Yep.
and everyone's got their eyes on the pie right now. Just like half the people in the industry right now are in it for the wrong reasons.
Hmm.
Maybe that's a little too dramatic, but the legislators and the policy people, they all want the same thing out of it. They all want the money. It's going to fix their roads and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's got to, you got to strike a balance down there. So, and that's,
Yeah, they see the green rush. They think, like, especially with everything happening with the economy and everything these past 2 years, it's just like everyone's like, "Oh, this will fix everything," and it's like,
yeah,
no. Like, do you see what's happening in California? Do you see that, like, how much of their economy, or like, what, I can't remember what the statistic was. I feel like it was something absurd, like 40 or 50% of the sales happening in California is still happening in the
yeah,
traditional market if you like combine the two together. And it's, yeah, it's like overtaxation, all the red tape. Me personally, I'm very against the distribution
yeah,
model out there and forcing everyone to go through a distributor. I think that's a bunch
yep,
of bullshit. So I think there's a lot to it that like we need to learn. And on the federal level, there's so many different ways we can go about this. I think the best way would just, open up interstate commerce. I think it would help to a certain degree, but I also feel like that's just going to be a microcosm for what's going to happen
sure,
federally anyway. I and at the same time, allowing the states to just do their own thing is great, but then we have this massive patchwork, and then how do you do
yeah,
business with each other? Like, what does that look like when you do open up interstate commerce? And then, rescheduling is like out there too, and that's horrifying to think about. I guess, like, my long-winded statement, I am more about
yeah,
decriminalization over
sure,
legalization. I think that no one should be in jail for a plant. Like, yes, there should be some parameters on how much you can carry and what that looks like and stuff like that, but that's getting more into like taxes and making sure you're paying
yeah.
your taxes on stuff. So I think if we can like figure that out, there's just, to your point, there's so many ways that we could just fuck this up with federal legalization. And I don't think everyone has like can fully comprehend all which way this can go
No,
terribly
and I
wrong.
mean, in their eyes and a lot of people's eyes, what interstate distribution looks like is up armored three-tier distribution. So, I mean, I've heard this tease for a while. It's the alcohol industry is why you have three-tier distribution. They took that
Mm-hmm.
they went from Budweiser went from supporting campaign to eradicate marijuana, whatever it was called, and the Black Hawks coming in on the hills and stuff, to basically pushing three-tier distribution models. And now,
Yep.
you see these big groups in Washington and who's tethered with them, and it's up armored security companies. So, and then you get labor unions involved with that, be like, listen, this is going to be, an armored car driver transporting cannabis across state lines. I mean, that's a $70,000 a year starting salary, easy. So they get the labor unions, appetite wet for that. You get all the major alcohol distributors. They already got the infrastructure, so it's they're all buzzards. They're ready to swoop in, and it's all
Mm-hmm.
ugly and very, very costly. So it looked like the Fed bill was going to start moving again, and I think this, unfortunate situation with Ukraine right now has got them tied up. So I'm sure that's on the back burner, and now we got a Supreme Court nomination going through and all this stuff. So it seems like Washington's got their hands tied, which is a good thing for us, to slow the roll on this federal bill. I mean, if it really got traction in the next couple months, it's not gonna look good for us. I mean, no one's got their ducks in a row on it, so
Yeah.
it's just gonna happen. So
Yeah. There's just so much to it. And everyone just, I don't know. A lot of people I talk to, just, it appears they think federal legalization
huh.
will fix everything. And then I come in and I'm like, no, it's not. It's
Mm.
definitely not. And um, I don't know. I guess that's just such a counteractive view sometimes, to people that aren't in the thick of it and
There's two
realize
bills. You got the
just
Schumer Cory Booker
the
bill,
impact.
which is the 25% tax and the big model. I want to say it's Representative Glace or something like that. She's out of the South. She has the small model bill. She's a Republican. It's got bipartisan support, but that's a terrific bill.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it does it.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
remember
it's
reading on that
basically
one.
like let the states figure this out, and then it builds in a timetable to interstate commerce. And we have a lot of good debate internally with the trade organization about interstate commerce. I was hot to trot on it for a minute. I thought, especially for Maine, we're overproducing already. We have such a high number of great cultivators. And like it looks like New York is only going to have outdoor cultivation licenses. So it's like, well, who's going to bring the headies down to New York but Maine? Like, let's do this thing. Unfortunately, it would also mean Curaleaf coming up here with $50 ounces and collapsing the market. So there's always two sides to
Yeah.
the story.
Yeah. And you brought up a really great point about interstate commerce. So it seems like, at least from my observations, interstate commerce, like the reason why we want it so badly is to help with an oversupply because have too much oversupply in our state. And so we need to get it out. It's like, what other benefits are there for interstate commerce? Because, like I said earlier, I just feel like it's just a microcosm of what's going to happen. It's like, okay, you're oversupplying, so now you're going to ship it out. So then are you going to keep growing your same amount? Are
For
you
sure.
then going to increase so then you can ship out more? Like, I feel like it's just a
It is
band-aid.
because I mean this kind of starts to fall back on the operators. Is I think a lot of people got too big for their britches and scaled way too high, and I would never want to operate 10, 20,000 square feet of canopy. I mean, God bless them, but I'd much rather see an industry filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of 2,000 square foot and under grows, that can sustain and operate without outside funding and equity and all these partners and all this other stuff that just makes life complicated. But yeah, I mean, people came out the gate swinging, and we're in a unique position in the United States right now. We've never produced so much cannabis before, ever, ever. I mean, all markets are kind of in collapse. All the adult use, all the, our med market here in Maine. I mean, $600 to $1,000 a pound now. Um, and I hear from undisclosed sources that the back door is closed. I mean, that market is really in shambles. So there's
Yeah.
we're at an inflection point here. Like something's got to give. And this is why I'm grateful for being small and nimble right now. So um, something's gonna
Absolutely.
break, unfortunately. I mean, yeah,
Some,
a lot of people are
yeah,
gonna lose their businesses in the next year,
it's kind of,
unfortunately. That's what it's gonna come down to.
yeah. And it seems to be a reoccurring situation too, like in each market. Like, I don't know if it's like adult use that triggers it or what, but like it always seems like there's like this die off period of just people not being able to make it. And we just consistently see it like state
Yeah,
after state after state. I mean, I remember during my operation days, we were the market tanked so bad that we were selling wholesale pounds indoor for
yeah,
$800 a pound. And with our excise tax on the cultivation pound, with our indoor grow costs and everything, we our costs all in were 710. So we're making $90 net per pound, and I had no idea what we were going to do. I was the inventory manager, also overseeing compliance and the auditing team, and just like trying to manage these relationships and like, sell this weed. And it wasn't until new testing
yeah.
regulations came in
Oh,
for microbials, and it was that triggered everything, because we had an oversupply on the market that now no one could pass
yeah,
microbials. And so then everything shot up to like 2,500 a pound, almost like
wow.
within a week, because like no one was passing and there was nothing. And it's just like all of these cause and effects and these things that trigger the market, that like it's hard to be
Yeah,
stable with all of this, and people trying to develop business plans and have throwing out these outrageous numbers that they're going to get X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, you need to think of like the bare minimum, and then like tax an additional 25 to 30% on that for like
sure.
worst case
Yeah,
scenario. And like you might be somewhere in the middle, but we're just still trying to figure it out, and just adding that layer of federal legalization on top of all of it, like, just doesn't make sense at this point until we can all stand behind it unified and figure out where we really
yeah,
want to take this
and that's gonna
industry.
take a while. It really is. So there's no easy way out. It's but again, I always want to go back to us. The people that are in the industry and the people that work the plant for a living, and no, we didn't come to you in a dream and tell you that I'm going to be around to pay your mortgage for the next 30 years. Um, so, this goes into kind of my woo woo kind of hippie life philosophy. I'm an animist. So I think that, I look at the plant as a collaborator in this thing, and that she's got a lot of say in this on a, multidimensional level, if you want to go there, really. And she's testing everybody. And, she's tested me time and time again. And I see her test all everyone I know up here. I see the tests, and I feel like she's testing the markets, and she's testing the will of everybody right now, and teaching lessons. So I zoom out and watch those lessons play out. And I see a lot of people be, oh my God, I did all the right things, but did you, what motivated you to do this? You know, a lot of people, it was
Hmm.
money, and a lot of people came in fast and hot because they
Yeah.
saw the money, and that's the first thing that's going to piss off the plant. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. She's a labor of love, and you
Yeah,
gotta fall in
yeah,
love
you
with
got to
her.
put in the
So,
time, and you were talking about how cultivate. There's this die-off of cultivation, and it's just like that's another thing. I mean, people that run cultivation, I mean, pat on the back. I mean, God, I mean, it's 24/7, and no matter how fancy or how
yeah.
much money you're going to put into a grow, they don't run right. They're not, they're always something's always going to happen, so it's like
Yeah.
you want a surly ass captain at the helm. You gotta have an ops team that knows what it's like to take waves over the bow and be hanging on for dear life, because it's gonna happen to you. So that's what happens with too many partners and too many investors, is that the investors treat everyone like shit, and then everyone's like, I haven't taken a day off in 60 fucking days. Peace, I'm out. And then all of a sudden that thing's
Yeah.
sitting dormant, or even if it's the prettiest and nicest place, you can run it kind of loosely for a year, and then if you're not maintaining it and you're not cleaning it and you're not taking care of the rooms in between rips, then you got problems. Then you got a diseased building that's never going to pass a damn test until you rip everything out and
Yep.
start over again. So good luck with that. So, yep, it's
Yep.
again state.
I've
Yeah,
seen those facilities.
I bet. I bet.
Yeah, labor of love, and she doesn't
Yeah.
stop. Like, you always got to be there for her. So no matter what. And just on the note of your second wish with sustaining smaller operators, I mean, I think this entire conversation we've really dove into it about reducing all the red tape, perfect world regulations that are not real life solutions. What are some other things that you would like to see that might benefit small operators? Like, what can we do from a policy standpoint, from a regulatory framework standpoint? Like, I guess, what do you envision there to help sustain those smaller
So, I mean, I'll,
operators?
I'll talk about our model in Maine, because it's, for cultivation, it's a once we have in adult use, we have cultivation license from 500 square feet to 30,000, but the camera requirements, the excise tax, none of that changes, which is complete bullshit. So what I'm going to work on is I want to work on a small cultivation carve out and start to get some exemptions out of that. And maybe for small cultivation, we only have to have a camera at point of exit and entry. Maybe we pay half the excise tax or no excise tax, because these systems are built for scale. And anyone in their right mind is going to
Mm-hmm.
recognize that. And once you recognize that, then if you're offering these smaller licenses, then it's your due diligence as a regulatory body to make it workable, which is, simplest and easiest thing up here in Maine is to pull back the excise tax. We pay that as cultivators, just $3.25 a pound. So to free that up to pay for more help. I mean, who would think that you need 14 employees for 800 square feet of canopy? But we do. You know, and that doesn't
Yeah.
that doesn't hold true. It isn't. Someone that's running 8,000 square feet of canopy ain't employing 140 people. You know, there's no way. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
True.
there needs to be carve outs. There needs to be carve outs and exemptions for smaller operators. And on the retail side, maybe that's someone that just owns one retail and not a bunch of retails. It's like find your small operator carve out in manufacturing and retail and cultivation, and start to put those Easter eggs in there for these people. I in a perfect world, I'd like to see the regulatory body attach a liaison to these people and help them, basically build a roadmap. We got 3,000 registered caregivers in this state, and the state's trying to regulate them out of their own market. And I keep telling them these people ain't going to learn the code,
Mm-hmm.
and your law enforcement ain't going to be knocking down
Yeah.
doors because everyone's running LEDs. You can't get the telltale electricity bill. These people. So build an on ramp. Build an on ramp into a regulated market. Why?
Yeah.
What's so hard to? Otherwise, you're just pushing them back underground. They ain't going nowhere. And then that's your $30
Yeah.
eighth in an unregulated market against a $50, $60 eighth in a regulated market. So yeah, making carve outs for smaller operators in regulated markets, I think, is the common sense approach.
Yeah, I agree. And I think California is trying to do something similar too, with based off of size and how much taxes you're paying, and having some exemptions there. And
Yeah.
we need to adapt. We need to figure it out. And when people did get into cannabis for the money, and back in 2014, 2015, when we only had a handful of adult use states, and you could charge 70, $80 an eighth and actually make profit off of it, like, that was a very different
Yeah.
time than it is now. And it's like, people that are in it for the money, I tell them, I'm like, you're only really going to make a profit like the first, like, I would say 12 to 24 months in a brand new adult use market. And that's also very dependent on what states are adult
Sure.
use
Yeah.
around that state as well. Like, nothing is the same anymore. And like me, I'm a craft beer drinker. I love the smaller operators, and I love the same thing in my cannabis. And you're always going to have those consumers that prefer that quality that hand touch, that love that goes into that product. And we need to make sure that they can survive all of this red tape and still be here. I mean, like you said, for your third wish, that you want to make sure that the plant and the culture survives. It's a really big deal. And the only way that survives in the license market is if those legacy operators can be in the license market. If they can't, then they're like, there's nothing you can do, and that culture goes away. And then you have corporate cannabis that's like Colorado, and you just have the Chads
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Brads and Thads coming in.
Yeah,
So
I mean, but you know, the other thing is that if they do outregulate the smaller model, the culture won't go away, the plant won't go away. We're going to go back to growing dank nugs in our basements, in our closets, and guess what? We're going to get 6,400 a pound again, like the turn of the century. So there's that, you know. But
yep.
you know, I like this model. You know, I have these pillars keep arising. At first, it was this plant, like just focus on the plant, get this great flower out. You know, it's medicine. It's just people are so grateful for it, and it's humbling to do that work. The second pillar that rose up is creating meaningful employment, especially over the last 2 years with COVID. It's really meaningful to me that everyone that's on the team loves being here and loves coming in every day, and you know they get compensated fairly, better than most jobs. And you know, to me, that's another major argument is, you know, I get hate, you know, oh, well, you know, you left med, you're a sellout, oh, you did this, you did that, and oh, you know, it's like, okay, well, you know, 28 grand in payroll every other week, like, you know, that's
Yeah.
improving lives and lifestyles, and you know, and we're still getting good flour out on the market, so
Yep. And culture flows from leadership down.
yeah,
So, it's great that you're
yeah,
building a team. And I'm grateful that you did make that transition from the legacy market on over into the license market, and all the policy work that you're doing and putting your best foot forward. And like you said previously in our previous conversations, looking and seeking those battle lines, trying to see where you can move this industry forward. So with that being said, any last thoughts, any comments,
well,
anything you want to
thanks
shout
to
out?
you. I appreciate you reaching out and getting me on here. And, you know, just a big shout out to everyone in Maine. You know, a lot of good workers up here and a lot of great cultivators. And I stepped into something up here. You know, and I'm just humbled to be a part of it. And, you know, the last thing on the policy work, and we talk about all these mountains and all these scary, you know, things that we have to deal with, is just remember the candle in the dark room, and that does really work, and that you know, David and Goliath, all that kind of stuff. Like, don't let that fear keep you from moving. Light the candles, illuminate those dark
Mm-hmm.
rooms. You'd be surprised what happens. I mean, because that's what they're used to operating in. They're used to operating in these regulatory vacuums, and you'd be amazed how much just a little resistance can work there. So yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for taking the time. Let me pick your brain a little bit.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate it. Have a
yeah,
great day.